Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we have a wonderful video for you. This is an exclusive interview from some of the creators of Arms Trade Tycoon tanks. In this interview we talk about pretty much their scope for the game, what they're looking to do with the game, and also give you a little bit more info on what is the plans for the future. For me personally, I'm incredibly interested in this style of game. It is definitely up my alley, and I'm glad that I'm able to bring this interview for you. I'm also very thankful for the two interviewees. We have Lars Ericsson and also Alex Loubenets, who is of course the CEO and lead designer of Fungi Gaming, which is of course the company behind Arms Trade Tycoon. It was lovely to sit down and chat to them for about an hour, and this is the resulting video. So sit back, relax, and if you're interested in the game, I would like to also point you towards their Discord, where you can get one-on-one interactions with the developers themselves, so you can kind of not just mold the game, but also ask as many questions as you want to see what's going on with it. So there'll be a pinned comment with a bunch of social media stuff. Make sure to get on the Discord, and I'm there, so if you want to have a chat, we can have a chat there. But also make sure to get involved in the community itself, so you can shape the game that, well, you want to see. Anyway, enjoy the video. We first of all start talking about some of the interesting mechanics that they're looking to bring to the game.
So customization. Well, we will not be able to create parts from completely blueprints. Instead, we want to do it sort of in a two-step fashion. I can show you actually right away. So that's what we call engineering, right? You go here. You can see different components that you can have, different major tank components, hull, turret, guns, machine guns, and so on. And the way we see customization right now will be done in two steps. So let's say I pick up a hull, right? The next step you'll have a certain number of these modification slots. They will come in different fashion, and they will be, so you can install equipment. You can install it like external pieces. You can install internal pieces. We go there. In this case, let's say I can install the tail wheel. Some people, they were like, what the hell is this? Well, it's a quite famous part of the Mark 1, actually. It gives it some, well, it was supposed to give it some bonus for mobility. And you can install the second one. In this way, sort of, you can modify your tank. And I mean, you can see when you do this, certain attributes, they change. I mean, you can see crew awareness, for example, right? So that's the first way you can do this. And then different hulls, they will have different number of the slots. The idea is to try to sort of capture another type of mechanics. Is you can have a hull that has a very good set of initial attributes, but it has a very little potential for the future customization. So let's say that we'll have just one or two modification slots. On the other hand, you can have a hull that maybe is not so brilliant with the attributes at the start, but it has much more customization. It has much more slots that you can use to plug more stuff inside. So that's the first thing. And the second thing we want to introduce is we want to use something we call, well, technologies, basically. So imagine that this button right here will be called, you will have also called technology. And you will be able to choose certain technologies that will open you given number of attributes for additional customization. Let's say you'll have a technology which will be called riveted armor tier 1, right? And it will be, after you choose that, you'll be able to adjust the thickness of your armor in a given range. Then you will be also to choose, let's say, another technology that is called, let's say, sloped armor, also tier 1, And that will give you a certain range in modification of your angle for the, like, say, frontal or the rear or the top and so on. So this is sort of a simplification, yes, but it still gives you a tool to play also with the default attributes instead of like really, sort of dragging and extending the thickness of the slope and so on.
Yeah, it's basically like it's keeping like the core there as you said, but you can pretty much manipulate it to how much ever you want, at least when it comes to the statistics point of view, correct? So
Right,
yeah,
right.
so you can pretty much custom build it to whatever is required, even if it doesn't physically exactly look like that.
No, I mean, and by doing this, sort of controlling it, we will not really make so huge deviation in what you see and in what kind of attributes you get. Because, as I said, I mean, if you, let's say, you choose the slope tier 1 technology, right? So it gives you, let's say, a possibility to throw in, let's say, 5 or 6 points in the slope. And by that mean, that, well, the visual representation of that should not be that much different from what you see right now. It's not like, it's a completely like 90 degrees or 45 degrees armor plate. So it's a simplification, but on the other hand, we still give the player possibility to play with this. And I think that's sort of a really good cost-effective solution to do that.
Oh, I agree. Like it's I mean, at the end of the day, it's a compromise, right? But the way you're explaining it sounds like a wonderful compromise. So I like that.
Exactly. It's playing with a compromise. I think I'm actually getting quite a lot of these questions in the Discord. And the way I like to put it is like we are trying to look at what, in the old good days, how the guys, the game devs, how they were working, and they had wonderful ideas, but of course they were limited in terms of what can they actually implement. So they were always finding sort of a good alternative ways that were giving you the mechanics that they want to see in the game, but at the same time they are not loading maybe that heavily with the visuals because they simply couldn't. So that's a compromise that we're going for.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the other thing as well, when it comes to the ideas of components and stuff, the obviously the idea is to kind of build a tank to a need. So does the process when it comes to building the tank, do you get the contract first, or do you build a tank for contracts later on, if that makes sense?
The plan is that actually you're not limited uh, to build the tank due to some contract. You can do it whenever you want to, but you will want to know why you're building this tank, right? So the player will have to balance. Do you know sufficient enough of this particular country, who is, well, your potential customer, to predict what they want? Do you know like what kind of wars they engage? Do you know what kind of tank doctrine they want, whom they're facing, and what the opponents has to offer as a resistance to the tank, like anti-tank guns or what kind of other tanks they're equipped to? So all of that kind of information. So that's, you're not limited to only you get the contract and then you start building the tank. Most likely will be happening actually, you start designing the tank, you sell it, then you see the drawbacks, you see which parts of the tank needs improvement. You make sure that you actually get the so needed technologies or components, and then you start making upgrades. That's another important feature in the game that we want to have, that it's not like you build the tank, you sell it, and that's it. I mean, you'll be able to update it, so its life cycle will be extended.
That's awesome. Like, pretty much, I mean, you can look at a lot of tanks through history, like the Sherman, I suppose, if you really want to, where the first Sherman that was created was nothing like the last. So the other thing as well is that was brought up many times to me was a lot of the you talked about the old style tycoon games. One of the things which was kind of built into a lot of them was random events and stuff which would mean that if you did more than one playthrough, it wouldn't just be a linear story. So in this case, when it comes to this game, are you guys deciding to do more of a linear idea where there will be like set events through the history that you will follow? Or is there a way of creating like alternate history ideals through this? Or will it just follow a pattern?
Yeah, I mean, we'll start from the simple approach. That is, well, it's not yet so simple, but it's simpler than the alternative. We will start following the historical sequence of events. So, I mean, you know that, well, Britain, like Germany was pretty much against Britain in the Second World War, right? And so on. And all the major conflicts and the battles. Uh, but ultimately, we see that the biggest potential in the replayability of this game actually lies in offering this sandbox mode to the players.
So kind of taking away the like historical element and then just building basically whatever you want kind of thing, or
Well, when I'm saying a sandbox, I'm at the moment we're more focusing on what's happening in the world. So I mean, if you choose to play for Britain, right, you will still follow the technology tree of Britain. But what's happening around you? You know, if the First World War happened, that Britain happened to fight alongside Germany against France and Russia, well, why not? That can completely, bring a new dimension to your plans and how you're supposed to pick up whom to sell tanks, whom not to sell, and so on.
yeah, that would be crazy, like that, and crazy in a good way, obviously. Like that would bring a lot of variety to the different times that you would play through it. If especially if you wanted to, fix on a specific era. Like if you wanted to play, I don't know, like the First World War, but you wanted to play it from different angles. That definitely sounds really interesting to me.
Exactly, exactly. And I mean, to be honest, even in the historical playthrough, we'll still have to, we'll have to balance always the sort of the historical accurateness, right, versus the gameplay. I mean, the most obvious thing, if you take Germany, right? I mean, and you take Germany, you take I don't know, A7V tank. We know that historically they built not so many of those. They built like 22 or 20, if I remember correctly. And in this, sort of from this perspective, it's not so fun to play as Germany starting in the sort of pre-World War One era, right? You know that, I mean, well, okay, I can sell only 20 tanks now, but this is actually an example where we'll probably start tweaking a bit the history because you do want to, to play Germany, you do want to build those funny designs and sell them and see how they do on the battlefield. But if you know that you're limited by, well, 20 order of 20 pieces, I mean, that's not such a good business idea.
The other thing as well is you talked about there the idea of picking a nation. So when you begin, let's call it a campaign. So do you pick a nation and then from then on you'll make vehicles for that nation, or is there a way of, I don't know, switching nations halfway through, or is it only dedicated to that single nation?
Well, you won't be able, at least we haven't discussed, we haven't thought if you can just, change the nation along the side. What you will have in the game, something we call reverse engineering. You can see we have reserved a place there. If you look, this is, British playthrough, but this is the Renault FT17 standing here. And what it actually marks, it marks another game element that I don't think we have seen so many in other games, but it's what we call reverse engineering. So the thing is that if you go and by different means, let's say you're in good relation to France, you see that they have like two opponent tanks for you to buy if the deal is right. Then you can actually go back to your engineering and decompose those in components that belong to French school or to German school or whatever that comes from. And if the compatibility of these components with your parts is right, you can start building the sort of the hybrids, the tanks that has parts from one tank school or another tank school combined together. So this way, you can actually build based on different tank schools, but you won't be able to completely change your technology tree.
No, would I see it as kind of like an addition to the research tree instead of a replacement?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just if you take as an example, let's say you play for Britain again, right, and you have the Mark I hull, and let's say that you manage to get your hands on A7V again. So you decompose it, and you get a chassis, the mover from A7V, which is, let's say it's compatible with the Mark I hull. So then you make a tank that is semi-British and semi-German, and that has a chassis that actually now has a suspension system, but still based on the British tank, on British hull.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. Because as I said before, one of the interesting things is, yes, to relive history, but also you brought up the sandbox idea. That to me would definitely add into that idea and does really seem interesting. How many nations are you looking at least? Like when it comes to nations you want involved in the game, not just playable nations, let's call it, but nations which can do that type of effect as you talked about.
Well, if we go back to the playable nations, that's those 5 that you can see on our homepage, and that's what we announced. But then, as you put it, I mean, there's multiple nations. Well, I don't like the term smaller nations, but sort of more limited tank schools, right? You can take, I don't know, Czech, you can take Italy, China, and so on. Sweden, for a good example. To be honest, we don't have a sort of solid solution on in which way we're going to introduce them, because you can do it another way. You can either sort of include them in the game later on as sort of let's say DLC or free DLC, one or another way, or you can have them also in the sort of game, but as you put it, non-playable, but you can still sort of capture those tanks and use the components. We have to do the check, we have to do how much extra resources we can spare to introduce those tank schools as well.
Awesome. And with another part of the game that I don't think has been actually looked at too much, this idea of kind of the battlefield testing part of the game. Now, does that encompass just putting the vehicles in like a training environment, and then you getting back stats saying how well they've done, or so you get kind of a readout of what you need to improve? Or will it come more in kind of like, you have that tab on the side like the news articles where you find out, there's a critical issue with maybe a vehicle you've created and everything's gone wrong?
Sorry, you created a tank that has no gun. You have to redesign.
Yeah.
Well, actually, yeah. I mean, some people are asking, can you do this? I mean, is it possible to make a gun and, like mark but close? They do not include any spawn zones and just, ride on. Well, the way we see it is that when you make a tank and you sell it, after this tank starts to live its own history. In the way that, say you take France. France, now you sold, say, 100 of your tank design. And now each conflict or each battle in this conflict that France is participating, there is a chance that is calculated according to some other mechanics, some other elements, that your tanks will participate in that battle. In the first one, as I said, I mean, those battles will try to base them sort of on the historical battles. So it can be a Battle of Somme, right, or something else. And when that happens, then your tank actually gets its battle test, really. And then it can be either way, it can either meet tanks, so it will be tank versus tank battle, or it can meet anti-tank. Again, from historical perspective, we know that in most cases, actually, it's not tank versus tank. It's, tank versus anti-tank gun, or versus the mines, or the artillery, or whatever. So this is another sort of balancing thing that we'll have to see how it works best. But the essence is, again, that tank get in the campaigns. In the campaigns, they get in different battles, and in each battle, they get to face something. So the battle is not only the opponents; it's also sort of the conditions of the battle. What kind of landscape you have, what kind of urbanization level, how intense is the conflict. If this is an anti-tank detachment that your tanks meet, then what kind of what are they using as weapons? Is it anti-tank guns? Is it just rifles or grenades, Molotov cocktails? And then it gets it's being weighted, how well it is against exactly this threat. And then you get sort of the feedback on that. And that affects the reputation of this particular tank. So the better it does, the better its reputation. And then it's easier for you to do business with this tank, selling it to other countries.
Nice. And the other thing as well is that I was asked about was there's normally not just a progression when it comes to research with these styles of game, but also a progression in the kind of scope. So you normally start as like a small business, or let's say a mom and pop's thing, and eventually grow into like some weird conglomerate. Is there this idea in at least the scope of this game, or is it going to be, you're going to start off with this many engineers, you're probably going to end up with this many engineers, or is there this, bringing in recruits and maximizing, let's call it, efficiency of building your tanks and designing stuff?
Yes, I mean, it's a good question, actually. This will be achieved by several means. The first, as you say, that you will be able, if we go to the building, you see that you have the things that being lighted up. They indicate that each building you will be able to improve, upgrade, giving you some bonuses that are intrinsic for this particular activity of this particular building. Say, improving the research rate when it comes to protection, or when it comes to machine gun and so on, or decreasing the risk for the catching a fire or accident and so on. So you will be able with this way you'll be able to sort of grow your factory grounds, and it will be visually shown to you. At some point, you will go to, let's say, the next era, and then this will be also changed, including the buildings. When it comes to the sort of usual tycoon activities, yes, you'll have to actually manage your staff. engineers, workers. Then we have not talked so much about these guys with the suitcase, but the idea that you have more or less unique characters called administrators, which will be placed one per building, and these fellows will have different perks that will develop in time and will give you again pluses, bonuses to where this to the building where this person is stationed. So that's when it comes to how your factory grounds will expand or will change during the game. And then there's another factor that comes with actually the world map. The countries that you see, right? There will be more, of course, countries that will become active in the tank trade. And it will not be only about just finding the customer and selling. You will be able to do like activities in the countries, like creating a repair center, right, or maintenance center, or maybe something else. We are not final about how much of the factory grounds activity we want to put on the global map, but we definitely want to have your business activities here, not just selling and then watching these nice clouds passing by, but actually we want to use this one to give you really feeling of the global enterprise.
Yeah, it would be kind of nice to see if maybe there was something like tank parades every so often in specific countries, or maybe I don't know what you would call it, but kind of tech shows where you can kind of throw your ideas at it, and maybe you can get some bonuses out of it. The other thing is you talked about these administrators and how they benefit your working areas. Is there any negative ideas which can come as well? So if you get like an administrator who maybe, I don't know, they get a lazy perk or something, so therefore efficiency goes down, or are you only focusing on positive attributes?
No, no, no. I mean, there will be negative attributes as well. Drinks too much, thinks too much. I don't know. But yes, I mean, that's the point. There will be always positive and negative. And actually, we want to have the same system when it comes to designing the tank. I mean, you will have parts that give you plus in something, but they can as well give you minus in another part of attributes. And it's up to you to decide if this is, if this is worth, or maybe you should install. I mean, let's say again, go back to the World War One era, right? You can put a transmission, which will be, I mean, on the paper it will have good attributes, but it will be extremely unreliable, right? So is it worth? I don't know. And maybe it will also weigh too much, so you will have to pay with extra load on your tank. So yeah, there will be not only bonuses, but there will be also penalties. And when it comes to designing the tank, this is where it is supposed to happen. So this is the design bureau. Again, you have different elements here that are active. This one, the fresh one, this is where you start the design. This fellow that has some extra ventilation holes in the side. This is actually how you get to learn what happened in the battles. I mean, this is what we call analytics. But if we start with the tank design, so you have some designs that are already there. But if we start from scratch, we get our tank. So this is the one that we have been playing before with these two modifications. And then you can see the attributes list starts to fill in. So at the moment we have the mobility coming from the hull and those parts. We have the protection. Again, please bear in mind, this is just not even pre-alpha. So I already know that things will be changing quite a lot. I mean, let's say here you can see only sort of the thickness of the armor in our point system, but there will be also slopes. One slope per action, one per side, so to say. So we have also the crew and so on. And then we start building it. So given that we want to build, let's say, a classical one, so we equip it with this centipede we call mover. Some people call it running gear. I don't really know which one is the right one. We give it, well, these ones will not work, I know for a fact, but the male sponsor will do. Put it there, and then we put some firepower. You see the firepower is not, well, it's 0 so far. We give it the Lewis machine gun in the front, and we give it these ones. Some people ask, like, I mean, if you were following my actions, you saw that when I, let's say, picked up the gun, both of them went in both directions. Is it going to be the same in the final game? Of course not. You'll be able to make this, pick one gun on one side, another one on another, the same to the sponsors and so on. So this is, this is just a start. And the same way you will do, well, with the internal parts, you'll have to pick up the engine at least, the transmission part. And yeah, we have some ideas how to make it also really look cool. I'm not ready to show it at the moment, but yeah, I think you'll like, when we're done with this, I think you'll like how it looks like.
Yeah, I agree. It already, like, the thing that's kind of surprised me the most is the attributes. How many are already being taken into account? I thought it would just be, kind of a pretty simple, like top speed, acceleration, maybe traction or something. But there's so many different parts which are already being encompassed in the attributes. That's great to see.
it will grow. That I know also for a fact. But this is actually a part that is, one has to keep the balance. I mean, we can't have too many, but we cannot have too few. Let's say we cannot have a health bar for the tank protection, like this green line of health. That is not a good design decision. And also, at the same time, we cannot have, let's say, single parameter for the lower and then the upper frontal part and then for this and for that, because other one then becomes like a Excel sheet. Well, that's not a game. So yeah, but there will be more. We already see that there are quite a few missing, and there will be also way how you can actually include the different type of shells, ammunition. And we're also thinking to have the way to include the crew gear. We've been in contact with the guys from the Tank Encyclopedia, and they pointed out that that actually was also a critical piece for the tank equipment, the crew gear, like what kind of helmets you have, personal protection and so on. So yeah, I think that will also find its place here. Good niche.
Well, that's good. The one of the last things is at the top. You obviously have all of the different resources, which you use. What looks like to, I'm guessing, put all of these, components and stuff together. How do you gather those? Do you just get them incrementally over time, or is there ways that you can boost, let's say, resource input, or how is that going to work?
This little building that is currently not active but will be soon, this is called warehouse. So what's going to happen there, sort of in the same spirit as we use for the other house, you have several elements that are active. So in the very same spirit, there you will be able to conduct at least two activities. One is to actually purchase your resources. So you'll have to find the supplier. You'll have to watch the price and so on. And the other activity of this building is actually logistics of the tanks that are ready to be shipped to your customers. I mean, they will not just teleportate, on the fly. So you will have to manage that part. Again, there will be some balancing on not making this part too tedious, too kind of repetitive. So it will be like the player will be overwhelmed with this, like, buying 10 pieces of steel or a bit of rubber or so on. No, but yeah, you will have to purchase the resources, and then depending also on the tasks that you will get from different countries or from your government, you can have a way to get the resource there. And finally, this is sort of what we've been discussing, if one will be able to sort of get small income of the resources based on sort of some facilities on the global map.
Have you thought about, because you've talked about the idea of bringing in external vehicles to be able to try and take them apart and kind of learn from them. Would there be any resource gain from that idea in the form of scraps and stuff? Or would that just be only specifically for research of those parts?
That will be mainly for the research. You'll be able to sort of dissect those, get the components, and get maybe the technologies as well, but not so much for the resources. I mean, you think about that, you get like, 1 or 2 copies of Tiger, right? On the scale of the big factory ground, what you can scrap from that probably won't matter that much.
Yeah, that's very true. And probably the last thing that at least I have been asked to, talk to you guys about is the time. Obviously, looking at it right now, you've said that this is kind of an pre-alpha stage. What is the I suppose, schedule for development of this idea? You've talked about obviously the Kickstarter and wanting to do that. Is there any like definite dates or maybe months about what to look forward to when it comes to the development of the game?
Right. Well, the preliminary date for the Kickstarter, as we set it up, that will be late March 2020. And by the time we get there, we want to be able to show things happening inside administration, where you handle, well, let's say the actual production hall, warehouse, and administration. We want to be able to show a much more refined version of the technology, the way it's, again, I know for a fact that's going to change relatively soon, actually. So this will be changed. We want to be able to show more tanks, of course. Now we have, well, very limited number, but we want to be able to show at least 2 German tanks, and then show how the reverse engineering works with them. How, based on the sort of components from different schools, how you can create a combination of those. So really the tanks that the world has, well, not seen so far. And we very much want to show our view of battle performance, how that will happen and how that is going to be visualized. So that's the that's sort of the minimum task we set to ourselves.
Oh, that's great to hear. That sounds that really sounds promising when it comes to what we're going to see in the future. I know, at least from my point of view, I'm very much interested in this game. As I've said, it reminds me of many games that I've had, or at least played in my childhood, and to see it come into a field that I'm interested in is very, very cool.
Thank you. Let me guess. Gear City is one of them, right?
Say again, sorry?
Let me guess. The Gear City is one of those games, right?
The Gears?
No, the Gear City.
Gear City? Yeah.
There was this game about creating the cars. I remember I played that quite a lot, actually, as well.
Yeah, there was I mean, at least for me, when it comes to tycoon games, there was a ton of them. When I think about it, like one of the one of the bigger ones that my sisters used to play was Roller Coaster Tycoon, like those style of games. And at least for me, I was much more interested in like a Railway Tycoon and some of the more larger kind of grand strategy ones that they had. So yeah, it's really fun to see it, in this form this time.
That's actually another thing, because I mean when we sort of start our way, when we start working on this, we heard quite a lot of feedback that, well, Tycoon sort of is a dead way. I mean, nobody plays Tycoon games anymore, but we actually disagree with it. I think we think that it's we might as much see sort of the new generation of Tycoon games that will bring new players, and that will create the interest again, sort of recreate the interest in this genre.
Yeah, I mean the amount of times I've been told over my life that World War II games are dead or city builders are dead and they're never coming back. And now we have, a massive resurgence of both of those styles. I tend not to believe when I'm told that something's, or something's not going to happen, or, people can't do this. No, if the product is good enough, it definitely will.
Exactly, exactly. And that's what sort of brings us to the point that what gives us confidence is that we're also sort of stepping in the setting that at least we haven't seen before. A tycoon that deals with a very a very sort of detailed level of engineering and constructions of what you sell, getting the feedback of what you sell, not just, sell it, this cashier machine, sound of money coming in, and that's it. I mean, you never hear what you have done. And in the setting of the arms trade. So all of that together, and at the setting of the arms trade, that is actually at the moment is focused on tanks, and as we know, the tanks is well, it's pretty popular theme for the PC game. Well, just not just PC, the games in general. Just look at the War Thunder or World of Tanks. So that's why we think that this combination of tanks and tycoon and engineering and design will be really accepted by the community, and it will find its place.
Oh, I definitely think it will be, and just as kind of a very very pie in the sky in the future thing. Obviously, when you look at the name of the game, being Arms Trade, Tycoon, and then tanks is the is the idea. Like, if obviously this takes off to eventually expand into other areas of arms trading. Like, as I said, very much pie in the sky at this point.
Yeah, what should we say, Lars?
Well, yeah, you you sort of seem to figure it out. So yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's. I think that there's so much.
yeah. Sorry. Yeah, like you say, it's absolutely a distant idea, but a perspective. So that if this generates enough interest, yeah, hopefully.
Good. Yeah, that's great.
Yes, that's the intention. But as you said, this is well, maybe not light years from now, but this is some years from now. And I think even for the Arms Trade Tycoon tanks, there's so many ways how this concept can be expanded. We are talking about different tank schools. We are talking about this, sandbox mode. We are talking about rare or prototype tanks that maybe, they never made it from the blueprints, but there's nothing really limiting us. Well, there's some things that limiting us, but let's hope that they will not be that limiting in the near future. So to introduce those rare tanks in the game as well, and yeah, and more things. I mean, we're talking about tanks, but as we know, there are other armored vehicles that will be really fun to, to play with and see how they do on the battlefield and try to sell those.
Yeah, like I suppose wheeled vehicles, generally like infantry fighting vehicles, stuff like that. The other thing as well, just staying on that point, is when it comes to the feedback is obviously the really interesting thing, right? Because that's what at least for me splits it out compared to every other game, and also the sandbox idea. Like, surely that just in itself gives you kind of limitless possibilities of what can eventually end up happening when it comes to your experience in the game. That's really interesting to me.
There will be tons of work to balance it out, and see which solution works, which doesn't, which sometimes. But I think the sandbox is actually one of the. It's like, if you think about this, the inspiration comes from the one of the first games, at least on my playlist, Civilization, right? They have this sandbox. It's always, unless you go for the historical map, you always end up in something new.
Yeah, well, that I tell you what, that would be insanity, thinking about it. Like, what if eventually the idea expanded to the point where the world map was randomly generated? I think that would be kind of odd, but that that would definitely bring it to the civilization idea eventually. But yeah, that might be a little bit too far, at least for me.
Well, yeah, I think you're a bit ahead of us. We haven't thought really
Yeah.
that much ahead. Like, so we go step by step. First, just the events will have to unfold differently. But then when I'm talking about events, you have different type of events. You have events like, literally one of the most important is, which country fights when with whom and how that goes. But then you also have the events like, what kind of happens with the technology. When we talk about the tanks, one of the most interesting, of course, for you will be as a player, will be like what kind of anti-tank weapons being developed, at which pace, where. But then sort of the other things that can be put into that mechanics, because when we're following the historical sequence of events, right, we're more or less limited to say that, yeah, your tanks, they were well, but sorry, this country, the one that owns your tanks, it still lost the war because historically it happened. Sorry. But if we're talking about the sandbox mode, now we have kind of free hands for this.
Yeah, anything can happen. At least when it comes to what you're trying to deal with.
Exactly.
Yeah, it sounds. I don't know. My brain's going a little bit haywire, if I'm quite honest. Like trying to work out all the weird and wonderful possibilities. But I suppose I've pretty much asked like everything I need to, really. You've answered the questions incredibly well. Is there anything you'd like to add to what we've chatted about today?
No, I think we covered actually quite much. The only thing I can add is like we're very happy when we see new faces on our Discord, when people join us, when people ask and put their suggestions under the suggestion channel. And yeah, so please join us and give us your feedback. Tell us what you think, what you like, what you don't like, what you see. Maybe you see something differently. I mean, there was actually funny. There was a comment that, I mean, I never ever in my life, I never paid attention to this. Now I know that it was, if we go here and if you look at the British flag,
Yeah, it's the wrong way.
you see it's symmetrical.
You need to
It's
push
not the
over
wrong
the
way, but I mean
yeah,
the
you need to push them
stripes,
over a bit.
exactly, exactly. And this was, I mean, wow. So people have been actually looking at this in the sort of detail and even seeing these differences, and that's cool. That's really nice.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's amazing how much of an eagle eye a lot of people have, which is only good, at the end of the day, because it means that everything can be watertight when when it comes to like release and stuff like that. That's wonderful.
Right. Yeah, but I think then we covered it for today.
Yeah, it seems like it. I mean, I've got pretty much everything that I've needed to get asked answered. So, just want to thank you, obviously, both for doing this. It's very, very kind of you to be able to sit down for a bit and give up your precious time and talk about this project. I'm very glad that you did.
Thank you for joining, and yeah, I think it's really cool that to have this opportunity to show the progress, to show what we are doing, and also discuss, our yeah, to discuss our views, how we want to handle that, how we want to develop this in the future. So thank you.
Yeah, it's definitely something that's missing, or it seems to be in game development. There's always this weird disconnection between, or at least a perceived disconnection between the developers and the actual player base for the game. So it's nice to see that that's being, sorted at the ground roots of the game. It's really nice how responsive you guys are.
Thank you. I mean, we thought about this actually quite a while. We thought if this is, too early to go out and sort of reveal ourselves at the stage that we don't even have an alpha. But then we thought that if we do this, and even like at the alpha phase, we we already limit ourselves to how much feedback can be incorporated in the game, or how many different ideas we can actually include in addition. And then we decided actually to go out and say hello to the world already now. Thank you for your time, and it's been a pleasure on our side. And I guess until next time.
I'd just like to thank Ambrosius McClellan, B. Young, Blackie, Daniel Stanton, Jay Wilt, John Ryman, Joseph Anders, Martinez, Moxie, Super Cacti, Uyins Terry, Elove Goat, and Seductive Trash Can for supporting the channel.